So if I have ever had advice for all of you or anybody watching when they have car questions on what to mod or what to do or what to build or how to avoid an issue or self-inflicted problems or how to plan ahead, I always say do not mod your daily. And if you don't have a daily and you start modifying your car, you should have a daily. That's like a big dad moment. My friend who owns a Subaru shop and I constantly joke that the price to do any significant work on a Subaru should include $1,500 for a D-Series single cam Honda Civic for you to drive while your car is built and fixed. So we have a funny situation here where if you're going to mod your daily, make sure it's sensible enough that it won't cause you significant problem, or plan it well, or do it in stages, and if all of that fails, just document it and share it so at least we can all laugh at how you did. So that brings us to an important thing. I have shown a few things about what I'm doing here, but I wanted to formally address it and explain it and show you guys what I've been doing just for fun, because when everything you have is modified, it can burn you out a little bit, especially if they're all LS stuff. At times I want to branch out and do a little bit different things, and it's just the time, R&D and stuff, going with unknowns. But part of the fun for me, obviously, at this point is doing a bunch of unknowns. You could say I like taking a situation where people say it doesn't work or can't work or shouldn't work, and exploring that option myself. I don't like to accept what other people say initially. I'd like to find out it's a problem on my own. I'm very skeptical, obviously. That's how I've found out and done so much with what I do and share. So I thought it would be fun to, like, a rule of thumb with my Kia was I'm like, man, I'm never going to mess with this just so it's always so good. And then I'm like, well, if it starts to have issues and I have to tear into stuff, that's when I'll mess with it. And ironically, it has had one or two problems, which is a wheel bearing now. A whole one wheel bearing. And my flex pipe on my exhaust I have two catalytic converters. The flex pipe between them broke, and it was just dumping exhaust gas into the car. It's right near the firewall and right where your feet and the HVAC system is. And it's just coming up into the car like all the time. It just stinks. And also, it started to smell, and I heard it a little bit, and I'm like, what part of the exhaust is damaged? And then it eventually became like just the buzzing Nissan down the street with no exhaust all the time. And I'm like, okay. So I was like, well, it's time to screw around. So earlier than that, just for fun, I have a bunch of Megasquirt stuff, and I do things with it, or we hook it up to friends' stuff. I do R&D stuff for EFI Source, and I get asked this a lot, and did I give up on Megasquirt, or did I give up on a certain platform? And I think I've explained this a bunch of times, and maybe this will be the first time you're hearing it. I like to move around on platforms to stay fresh, and then also, honestly, I think the Terminator is just the best deal for the money right now. If you have an LS, or if you have something that's 100% supported, right? So if you have a Kia Soul and you want to hook up a Holly to it, that could be more difficult for you, depending on who you are. I would say the average person would probably struggle and not know what to do or buy or crimp or do whatever. And I am unsure if the trigger options configurable in a Holly can do the trigger pattern on this. You might have to add an external crank trigger and do some other things. Anything, you can do anything with enough time, effort, money, knowledge, obviously, right? But is it economical? Does it make sense? Would it be fun? Is it like a part-time thing? Well, all of that. You have to weigh all of this, of course. So the one day I was like, what would be funny is if I just took this micro squirt and I hooked it up to the Kia. So I could do like a dry nitrous kit, or eventually turbo, or learn some secrets, or adjust things like it has variable valve and cam timing and some other things, maybe all of them. Honestly, to be quite honest, I'm not totally sure. But it has dual cam, and it has phasers for intake and exhaust cams. So it does have a little bit of variable cam, variable valve, whatever you want to call it. Moving the cam does move the valve events, so all of the above. Anyway, I digress. I thought it would be neat, so I had to do the exhaust, I did an oil change, I did some other stuff, and then one day I was like, you know what, I'll just take this crank position sensor off right here. It's a 2-wire, it looks like a VR, and I'll wire it into a micro squirt that I have laying around. And I mounted this in the engine bay, bolted it to the rad support through one of the bolt holes, and I started adding sensors from the car, getting data on the car just for fun. I'm a data junkie. I like knowing and seeing what stuff can do, and part of a funny thing about these is no one really mods them. The ECU support isn't there. Maybe you guys could let me know if there actually is. If you look up stuff for this, you get some random generic chip sites that say they can do a performance flash for you, which is probably looks like 100% manure. That's my child-friendly word for the day. So it looks fake. If anything, it doesn't do anything, and it just costs you money, and it's not real flash tuning, etc., as you might know it with modern supported vehicles. So I was able to get the crank trigger in. I was able to see RPM, no problem. And then I was out here. I did a couple sensors. I stole the map sensor. I grabbed TPS. I grabbed a bunch of things. And then I was like, you know what? Now that I have crank, it would take me 2 minutes to wire LS coils to this micro squirt. So I had a spare rack of coils, and I wired it up real quick, and I've had like 5-6 ugly fuse panel iterations in here. As I was just adding stuff, I was alligatoring it and just having fun, and then I'm like, well, now I need a more elegant, semi-permanent, adjustable solution for me to keep taking over things. And then, so I wired LS coils, and I guessed until it would fire and run good. So I moved my timing numbers around till the car started and ran good, seemed good. And then I adjusted the amount of timing. Like I had to start it with like 80 some degrees of timing in it to make it run and sound good and not overheat and not glow the exhaust and everything else. So then the other things I did was I adjusted the angle until the timing numbers at idle all started to make sense numbers wise. And then what I did was I marked, actually I didn't need to mark the balancer on this. Believe it or not, this 2013 Kia has a keyed crank. It has a timing marker similar to an old small block where it says like 0, 10, whatever. I didn't have to mark it, surprisingly. I checked it with a timing light, and then I was only like 5 or 10 degrees off the cranking degrees to get accurate timing. So I was within like 3 degrees, I believe, of actual timing. Pretty neat. It's funny how you can just do a bunch of that by feel if you know, all of this stuff was making sense, right? So I was like, wow, so now it's running on LS coils, so now I can adjust the timing, and I can do anti-lag and two-step and everything else, change the rev limiter as long as the electronic throttle isn't shutting. And then I was like, you know, it would be really cool to turbo this and like put ancillary injectors in it and just spray extra fuel and put a flex fuel sensor on it or do something. And I was like, I should just do this as a side project, as like a break from my projects. So I started a project to alleviate the stress of my projects. Understand? Does this make sense to some of you? So I was like, well, here's the issue, right? The electronic throttle is a big issue on cars like this. And a primary example is like a C6 Corvette. People put Holley integrated install on a C6 Corvette. But when the stock ECU doesn't see, I believe you can unplug the pedal, but if you don't have the throttle, it gets really mad. And like all sorts of body control module stuff gets upset as safety protocols are built in. So what people do is they do the entire Holley install, and then they plug in, like they extend the wires, or I don't know where they put them. A couple people said they put them under the dash. They take the throttle body and plug it in under the dash of the car, so you can hear it like wah, wah, wah. You can hear it like slapping around and everything in there, but it's not doing anything. It's just there to satiate the needs of the computer going, where's my throttle? And turning off a bunch of stuff. So that's easier than it is to circumvent all of those systems. So knowing stuff like that, I was like, well, if I make 2 pounds of boost, is it going to shut the throttle? Is it going to limp the car? Is it going to turn off the DI system on me? and stall out. Even with my ancillaries, they're only adding a percentage of the fuel, right? So I'm thinking about all this, and I keep changing small things with the micro squirt. As it got colder, one of the funny things I found, I would start it cold, like 40-degree coolant temp, and it would rev to the moon. And I would have to like ride the clutch to kind of bring it down. I'm wondering what the hell's going on. I'm like, did I disconnect something? Or after I checked everything 1,000 times, I put the stock coils back in, fired it. It fires fine. And I noticed when you start this cold, it makes a weird tone. It's like, whoa. After a couple seconds, it'll come back down. And I'm like, maybe it is... So I have a base amount of ignition in. So maybe what this car is doing is opening the throttle an extreme amount for cold startup, or catalyst heating, or all of the above, right? Combustion chamber, just getting something to an immediate temperature. It happens within 5 seconds. So the funny thing is if you would fire this car and immediately like throw it in reverse and dive on the clutch and pull out of here, it was fine. Within a couple seconds, it was idling low again, but it had that event where it would hit the rev limiter. I let it do it a couple times just to see if it would. I'm like, is it going to tag the limiter and then calm down, or what is it trying to do? And then I realized it's probably a catalyst cylinder, something warm-up strategy, or maybe the car just doesn't start that great unless it's like wide open throttle nearly, and then they do something with the ignition. Who knows? All of this is theory, right? And then I data logged it, and I found that out. The pedal position is very high on some cold startup situations. But as soon as it's been running any tiny bit or it has a little bit of warmth in it, it doesn't do that. So I'm like, well, here is my issue, right? I have to deal with that because I can't just leave the stock ignition system on, because this thing will ping awful sometimes. It doesn't matter what fuel is in it. It'll just ping its face. At 93, E85, a mixture, it doesn't matter. And part of that, I believe, is because... its emissions is similar like a 2500 truck. It is targeting 1.0 lambda all the time. It has like a 14.7 air fuel wide open all the time. That's part of the reason why it gets fantastic mileage and other things, I'm sure. EPA, emissions, etc., etc. And I'm like, well, just weighing all this stuff in. And then I was like, it would be cool to run this car as much as I can on the micro, try some things, and then try to put it on maybe a gold box I have laying around and just keep learning. And it has a variable runner intake manifold too. It has a short runner and a long runner, and it has a flap that you can actually tell if you look at the dyno plot. It makes fantastic torque down low, and then it almost looks like a VTEC car. Like it almost looks like it has a high and a low cam lobe, but it's actually variable runner intake manifold on top of variable valve timing and everything else, and cam and everything. So I'm like, man, it's going to be difficult to do the throttle, to do everything. So I'm kicking it around, mess with it, take it off, plug it in, plug it not in. And I was talking to Mike at EFI Source, and there is a Megasport compatible drive-by-wire box called the DBW X2. And it's called the X2 because it can do two high current devices. It can do two throttles. It can do... So you guys might not know, a lot of modern blowers have essentially, it is a throttle body, electronic throttle body in the blower. So instead of a mechanical bypass valve, they install an electronic throttle blade from like a Cobalt inside a LT4 blower, I believe. And some of the bigger Hellcat blowers have an electronic throttle. So what they can do is they can limp and bypass the blower and change the amount of boost. And there's, just imagine... the range of things you can do with that. So the other thing that the DBW X2 box can do is power one of those electronic wastegates. So all of this has to happen at some point, and proof it and everything else. So there's beta firmware for the Megasquirt that lets you CAN bus to the drive-by-wire box, so that it sends TPS signals and everything around, and they're copacetic and they're happy. One of the neat things about the box is it can accept any drive-by-wire linear input and drive any linear electronic output, and you can change them. So you don't have to worry about compatibility, but what you do have to worry about is wiring, functionality, and just making it work on your own, right? So I do believe there is some base stuff for LS-based, like LS2, LS3 throttle, because I would say that they're like the most used, mapped, well understood, right? So I asked Mike, I'm like, all right, you know what? I'll mess with this. But then I'm like, well, do I do it on the car and make a mess out of my car? And do I ruin the connectors or whatever else? So I got hooked up with a guy on Sloppy. I was like, hey, who runs a junkyard that has Kia Hyundai stuff? And I asked him for stock intake manifold because we're going to fit ancillary injectors, and I'll show you that. This is like the reveal theory video, right? If you hadn't guessed by now, I'm probably talking for 80 minutes about nothing. So, it might be interesting to some of you. So the nuts and bolts and everything else will be... I'll probably just make another whole video to show people that want to see just that. So I got an entire other intake manifold because I'm like, I could just drill into this and pot them, but then like if my injector bung falls into the intake or something ridiculous. So part of the appeal of this project, or layering a difficulty on, or layering an easy aspect of it, you can look at it either way, right? I was like, well, I'll get an intake fitted, looking good, working, check it for leaks, see how it survives sitting, and then bolt that on, right? And then before we put the turbo on this, yes, turbo, of course, before we do the turbo, it would be interesting to do all motor testing, screwing around, seeing how it goes, then putting the turbo on, right? If I can do all that. If I have all of my stuff lined up and I want to go straight to turbo, I may just, obviously, because I'll have front intake, exhaust, everything off. It might be easier just to go all in, right? I guess I could just unplug the intercooler or something. So, or we can prop the wastegate open and make very low boost, almost zero boost pulls. So I have the drive-by-wire controller. So what I did is I was like, hey, can I get another intake manifold, and can I get some of the connectors, and then can I get a drive-by-wire pedal and throttle that matches mine with the connector with 6 inches of pigtail wire? Because what I want to do is use those little Wago clips and get it functional, working, wired. Then once that's working, I can research the connector, and I did find both on Bollinger Motorsports, and it was only about $18 to get the throttle and the pedal connector specifically. So what I can do now then, on top of all of this, is permanently crimp the stock connectors on everything, and then I don't mutilate anything I have. So if this car, see what all this leads to? This is what you have to know before you do all this dumb stuff. It's exhausting. I may have to plug the stock throttle body in and just zip tie it next to that throttle body so it can see it and it doesn't do anything. This thing is heavily... I don't know if it really has a body control module or if the whole ECU does certain stuff, but you don't want to make it mad enough to inhibit you. It's nice to remove that stuff, but there's so much integration into newer cars, even a simple 2013 Kia Soul, that you can cripple yourself by unplugging the electronic throttle body. So, all of the above. And it was wired on the micro. It did have a little bit of ugly stuff. There was just empty wires laying everywhere. I just had them Velcro taped to keep them off of things since I was moving and changing things. So the other day, I was like, let's go all in on this. What I'll do, just for fun, is see how this goes. I can always reverse it or stop or whatever, but we put the Mustang on the dyno. I'd like to get flying on the Mustang. I have parts here for like a year. It's time. It's time to get that thing going. And I'm like, well, maybe I'll do the Kia quick since it's my daily. And hopefully all goes well with my research and my planning, and I can get it up and going. I'll daily the Mustang, and then we'll bring the Mustang in here in like a week or two. So I think I'm going to make a week or two my cutoff to get most of this rolling, and if it starts going poorly, cut my loss, and then do it another time maybe. But I just keep chasing this. I didn't want to make too many posts about it because some of it's not that exciting, really. Like some of you might think it's exciting. I thought it was exciting. It was rewarding to... I took apart the crank position sensor, has its own little intermediate pigtail, unbolted it, unplugged it, it came out like a foot-long lead. I was able to, it was very well glued, potted, epoxied, heat shrunk, everything else, so I had to dig into it quite a bit to get bare wires. And then I made nice, clean connections, and I heat shrunk the hell out of that, and glue and all that fancy stuff. So that's nice and secure, obviously, because even if I'm not piggybacked in, that has to be a clean connection to give the engine crank position signal. That's important. So, did all of that. Yeah, so I bought a GT28 a 2860 turbo T2 flange. Joey Fowler is making a log. He's partially building the physical log, like tacking it, and then we're going to pull my exhaust out and see where that turbo and everything is happiest, right? Put it somewhere where it's easy to work on and do the rest of the stuff. Oil feed, drain, downpipe, outlet to the intercooler and everything else. Make sure that's easy. Make stuff easy for yourself, not hard on yourself, if I can give you a lesson there. So yeah, like all of these things all at once. And then, so what I did was I bought a nice 5-pack of Firewall Grommets, 2-inch Firewall Grommets, because I knew I'd be passing a lot of wires through. Because I was like, now instead of just the engine bay and afterthought and everything else, I'm just going to knock a 2-inch hole in and run all the wires, all of the gold box stuff, all the drive-by-wire stuff, have a nice grommet so it's done and water doesn't come in and everything else, and blah, blah, blah. And then I started like my I always end up, I never develop I'm not a good planner, funny enough, because I feel like I can plan a build pretty well, but as far as laying out 40 connections for an ECU and making them as neat as possible, I don't have that skill. But I did okay, I think. I'll show you then. And I tried to make everything clean layout. And then recently I've taken a liking to those DT Deutsche connectors, and I bought real cheap ones with open end to crimp, and it takes forever to crimp the open enders, but the tools are $250, $450 for crimpers, and then the connectors are like $1 something. To do a male, a barrel, and a male and female barrel mating without the connector, it's almost like a little over $1. They're like 60 cents a piece for decent closed end barrel connectors. But when you're modifying something like this and it's like a daily or something that can't have downtime, it's so nice to just spend 20, 40 bucks on these connectors and pins, because they're so easy to take apart. You can take them apart 1,000 times and they just keep going right back together. And then the crimps are strong and it takes seconds. So if you have something that has like 5 wires and you need to be able to disconnect it, and it might be wrong, and you're like, I just made a bunch of permanent butt connectors and I have to shorten and cut and ruin everything. Or again, what you can do is a bunch of like 5-volt sensors. You could cut the wires going to it and split out and use a connector. So you can connect multiple things off. You can steal things, but then you're making it reusable, essentially. And if you have a pinning error, you can pop a few of the pins out and just swap them very easily also. So I've been doing a lot with that. I bought a specialty crimping tool for them. I keep buying the connectors. I have a bunch of spares. And then what's really cool about them is if you end up, like I changed a bunch of stuff, pulled a bunch of stuff out, if you use 10 of them and you end up using 6 permanently, you can pull those 4 out and pull all the pins out and just buy another pack of pins and use all the connectors again. So anyway, there's my sales pitch for Deutsche connectors. A little bit of money, but if you're going to be doing a lot of this, a lot of screwing around like I've been doing with this to keep it running. So like if I have an issue, I can just swap back, right? So if you have a 6-pin for your coil pack, LS coil packs, and a 6-pin for the stock ones, you can just go boop, boop. LS things are being weird, or it's doing the rev thing. Boop, swap everything back. Or essentially no downtime, right? No worries. And then you can, again, like move the pins. So the other day I drilled the hole, I put the grommet in, I ran most of the wiring out, and I just kept going from there. And then I made a better power solution and everything else, so might as well go to the factual stuff now, right? So I just kind of roughed this in last night, and what I wanted to do was get a small fuse panel. This is 6 connections and with a ground terminal on it. So the grounds are on the bottom. That ground stud goes right to the battery under the cowl, and then this is a 40 amp waterproof relay that comes from the battery. So underneath here is I have a key on 12-volt source. If I could open this. Special today, guys. So I found something that's key on and keys right off and doesn't stay on and doesn't shut off while cranking, and all the requirements that you would need to make this function. And it's this guy right here. So what he's doing is he is kicking the relay on. Here's the ground for the relay. Oh no, this is the ground for the battery. The ground for the relay is right down here, this real tiny guy. And this guy's for my light bar. But yeah, I cleaned all this up. It was a disaster. This is like only one of the wires I tapped out of the ECU, but I'm just laying everything in here now till it's happy and I can get a, it's functional. So when you key on, this gets power. It clicks on the relay. This is a waterproof pull to seat thing that was fun to learn how to do. Never done one of those. Waterproof. I've used them, but I've never pinned one myself. So I have a fascination lately with pinning and depinning tools and everything you can imagine. So yeah, like these are DT connectors, the DT. So anyway, you key on and it turns on this fuse panel. So here's the ECU. This is for coils and this is injector power. And then all of my stuff is, so this is all the ground connections for the gold box right there. Comes out semi-clean, not loomed. And then there's my Firewall Grommet, which I'm still passing stuff through. It's not perfectly clean either. And then I just snaked along, so all my power and grounds are just branching off a tiny bit long also. Just figuring out what I want to do and see how much room I have with the harness. So I got to figure out, you know, where everything's going to fit. So it has the LS coils in and running, and I pinned everything. I actually had extra pins, and I crimped the Megasquirt coil wires into the stock dirty coil pack connector, and then it runs. I just, you know, pin mapped everything. So here's the stock coil pack connector. There's the stock coil packs. It is running LS coils now, so what you can see how I can just unplug this guy, and these just are laying in here right now. I can unplug that, pull the coils out, plug the stock ones in, and its stock ignition system runs fine. So the other thing I did was pre-pinned Deutsche connector for the injectors. So this is orange is injector power, and then this is cylinder 1, 2, 3, 4. Those guys right there. So there's a 6-pin there to make it easy. And I wired the map sensor. So the other thing I did was I took like a conglomerate of sensors, and they all go to this Deutsche connector, this 8-pin. So there's the map sensor and the coolant sensors go into here. And then what I think I was also going to do is pin the cam sensor into this. So I have extras, so then I can pin the cam sensor in and I can do sequential. The other thing I did is I put a 2-pin, so this is my extension cable that's coming out of the crank position sensor that's VR. This was going into the micro squirt. I had it like right here-ish. So I did a 2-pin Deutsche connector, and then I left this long. It's a little bit too long, but I don't want to waste more pins while I have the rest of the car to do. So yeah, this is the split for the crank position sensor. So all this can be unplugged in pieces and fixed on a workbench or removed or replaced, and I don't have to rerun anything in or out of the car. So this is why I've been saying, like, I've been obsessed with these lately, and I've been buying nicer crimpers and everything else for it. So here's my coolant temp sensor, it's wired. Here's the IAT sensor. And then the other thing I did too is I have this whale expletive deleted intake here, but it's out of spare parts. So it's funny, this is exactly 2.5 inches. I had a 4-inch filter, I had a 2.5 to 4-inch thingamabob. So I did all this, but the stock airbox took up so much room, and there's cladding and plastic and stuff for airflow and just a million things under the hood. You guys know a stock car. So I cut everything out, so now you can easily do intercooler piping and everything else here, right? So I got all this done ahead of time one day. Just one day I just ripped out everything in engine bay that I could. So just another day of prep, and then I can weld this. I made this guy long enough that I can put the IAT bung somewhere, and then this coolant thing is long enough to go here-ish, and then like I said, most of the harness you can still move in a giant direction for now. So yeah, so you key on and that fuse panel gets power, so when I add like a wideband controller and 1 or 2 or 3 other things, they can all go there, and it all gets safe fused, key on, weatherproof, waterproof, because this is more, probably not my last iteration, but one of the more permanent ones, right? So I wanted to make it nicer from the start, and I just have the ECU just like piled on the ground here with pins, and yeah, so that's what I've been doing, and I was able to get it cleaned up and to this point and ready for the port injection swap on the intake, and pre-pin the connector and everything ready to go so that I can just do the injectors. And I believe the connectors are showing up today for the drive-by-wire throttle body stuff. So I have all of my notes here. Let me show you guys some interesting stuff that happened and I had to do. So you can see I have all these pinouts here. So the drive-by-wire stuff was really interesting. I found beautiful manuals for Kia Soul wiring stuff. And let me share with you a funny story. The wiring's all backwards on these diagrams that I found. It's 100% wrong. It's backwards. So what I did was I had all this. So this is the stuff for the drive-by-wire controller. This is the stuff. These are the Kia printouts, circuit diagrams. And then these are all what's backwards. So one of the reasons how I knew it after I crimped everything was I went to do the throttle connector second, and it says this is the electronic throttle control motor, positive and negative. These are in the wrong pins. So number 1 is actually in number 6, and number 2 is actually in number 5. And the reason I was suspicious was because wire 1 and 2 were really skinny because they're just signal and ground. And wires 5 and 6 were super thick because they carry power to the motor. And I'm like, this doesn't make sense. Why does the sensor have really thick wires? It has to be the motor. So then I got my multimeter out and I was like, yeah, this is an electric motor and I'm screwed. And I probably did my entire pedal wiring backwards too. So I had to swap all the pins, swap everything back. Luckily I DT connected everything. And then this is just like my notes for firing orders and trying to map out how many pins I'm going to use. And yeah, and then where to wire, what color, you know, from Kia stuff to GM stuff to the gold box, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, so what's nice is all of that worked the first time, fired. So luckily my brain was working then. Happy about that. And then let's go to, so here's the pedal up here. Here's the throttle. We'll bust these guys out and show you these. Sorry for the nap time. All right, lay all this out. So what we got here is, this is the drive-by-wire 2 controller. And then like I said, I DT'd these because I only got like a really short junkyard piggy guy here. And like I said, it's kind of annoying to ruin a whole DT connector, but not really. I can pull all these pins out and then just re-crimp them. So I found, since I had these physically, I found this connector. One of them is like a Ford MAF sensor connector. And then you can see here, significantly, the blue and the white here are the engine power wires, or the motor power wires for the throttle. And then also what I did is I had so much issue with the pins being wrong, I just put the Wagos on there until I figured it all out. So these are going to directly crimp to this connector for the throttle, and then these are going to directly crimp to a new connector on this also, and I can get my connectors back. And then also, like I said, since I've been using these and enjoying them so much, I did power ground CAN bus in and out on a DT connector that I had left over also. So then I was crimping these for power ground and whatever, testing everything, making sure everything worked. So I got that. Here's the stock Kia tiny little electronic throttle. Here's the weird pedal assembly. So I got all that going for me. This all worked on the bench. So I was like, all right, ready to put it in the car and hopefully have less problems. So all the pre-planning and testing hopefully will work out, right? And then I got this guy right here, the Deutsche solid pin connector, super nice. Because what you normally do is when you buy the super cheap set, like I've been messing with, I didn't want to spend $450 on a Deutsche set or even a medium grade set like these guys. So these are all, you know, I've been getting these from Amazon, finding out which one I like best. They're open terminals, right? It's an open terminal that you have to use a crimper, a regular terminal crimping tool with. So that's open. And it takes forever to line it up and get it set the way you'd like it. So the other thing to crimp, so these are the really nice closed barrel connectors, but you need like a $250 crimper for them. And there's some that were like 30 and 100 and everything else. And I didn't know what to get. So I reached out to like two of my automotive wiring buddies, Race Wires and Devin Vanderhoof, and they said that this particular one, it's like 30 bucks on Amazon. It works incredible, and it absolutely does work incredible. It's a good starter, right? The other ones have more adjustment and can do more sizes, but that's like the most common, and it's only 30 bucks, and he says it works and it lasts. So all positives in my eyes. So whew, I mean, did we get enough info here yet, boys? Here's my turbo up here. This is the GT2860 internal wastegate. It's a 5-bolt downpipe, water cooled, and then I have a 5 to 2.5 inch V-band adapter. And this is a Honda Civic JDM Sport from VS Racing intercooler. That's what's gonna go on it. So, whew, is that all exhausting or what? So that's all as like been like a little funny pet project, and now it's moving on to a little bit more than that. We'll see how it goes. I don't have huge goals. I don't want to make like 1,000 horsepower with it. I think it'd be neat to, this thing makes 120 horsepower. It'd be cool to add a couple, like see where the wastegate is and just be real soft on ignition but not burn anything up with too little ignition, obviously. So as a learning experiment, add a little bit of power, see if the turbo's too laggy. I might end up putting like an even smaller turbo on it. So all that's up in the air, right? But up in the air and moving along and learning and enjoying it and having fun and hopefully not ruining it, right? So that's all that, but oh man, big Kia project reveal. So what I can do is I took a bunch of pictures of some of this stuff, and I can show that in another video if this one isn't too technically overwhelming right now also. But yeah, the whole Kia thing is happening. It's not a joke. It was a joke for a long time, and now I thought it'd be funny to actually do it and not joke about it, because it's more fun to be about it, right? So enjoy that. Hopefully this isn't an hour. If it is, hopefully it's bearable. Okay, thanks, bye.